Hey, thanks for checking out my little series, Does the Bible Tell You So? Today's topic, that Adam and Eve sinned in the garden. Here's the thing, folks. It depends on which part of the Bible you're looking at. If you're just looking at Genesis chapters 2 and 3, then no, it doesn't tell us that they sinned. If, however, you're looking at it through the two primary Christian testaments, the First and Second Testament, Old Testament, New Testament, Hebrew Bible, Newer Testament, then you're going to say that it absolutely does tell us that they sinned, because that's what Paul does in one of his letters. So let's back up here for a second, okay? If you're just looking at Genesis 2 and 3, what does it say? It says that God tells the first human, you can eat whatever you want in the garden, but just not from that tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day you eat of it, you shall die. And then in chapter 3, the serpent chats up the woman, as serpents do, and they chat about it, and she ends up taking some fruit, right? Takes a bite and hands some to the dude who's standing there with her. And, they don't die. And then God sees that they've actually eaten from the tree he told him not to, and he gets kind of ticked, and he, according to the story, delivers some punishments. Okay, so according to that way of reading the story, God says don't do something, they do it anyway. That's disobedience, that's sin. That's where Christians tend to read this as being about sin. But what if we read it as a myth instead? What if we just look at it for what it's talking about? What is it talking about? Well, this part, this knowledge of good and evil, have you ever stopped to think about that? Like, this is a thing that separates us from most animals, right? Is having the knowledge of good and evil a bad thing? I happen to be quite fond of it, to be quite honest. It helps us make ethical and moral choices, doesn't it? Unless, of course, you were unfortunately born as a sociopath and you have a hard time doing that, but that's, Are you tracking here? There are two different things going on here in terms of the way people engage this story, right? So, what people are taught to look at in the story is what's going on here, right? The kind of literalistic way of reading it says that what I just mentioned a second ago, right? God said don't do it and they did it. That's disobedience is a sin. But the thing is, if you're going to read it that way, you also need to be honest about the fact that God is also lying, because they don't die in the day they eat of it. And here's the thing, I can hear people saying, oh, but it was a metaphorical, it was a spiritual death. The fact that because they've done this now, humans are no longer immortal. Here's the catch to that, though, is if you keep reading to the end of chapter 3 of Genesis, it makes it very clear humans were always mortal. In fact, God kicking them out of the garden is about keeping them from gaining immortality. It's not really even that he's pissed that they disobeyed him. It's, I don't want them to also eat from the tree of life and live forever. It's really fascinating, isn't it? What we're taught to see here. So, maybe take a second to read it for yourself and sit with it. But let me just read through two quick passages here that are part of this conversation. So in chapter 3 of Genesis, the serpent said to the woman, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like gods, knowing good and evil. God knew that. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and it was a delight to the eyes, and that the tree was to be desired to make one wise, where's the problem here, folks? She took of its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her man who was with her, and he ate. And then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together. You guys, eyes opened? This is like universal, reference for enlightenment. This is not a bad thing. But what happens is Paul says in Romans chapter 5 and elsewhere, but therefore, just as sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all because all have sinned. Where the bleep does he get death? Seriously, where does he get that? It makes me cranky, Go read it for yourself. that the two primary faiths that read this book, Genesis, see this formative story so dramatically differently might give you something to pause and think about. I hope you will. I don't know if Paul gets, some sort of award for his creative non-fictional writing and handling, reading into Genesis 3. But more to the point, folks, you don't have to agree with his mishandling of that story. Something to think about.